welcome to everyone. Welcome to the Catholic Perspectives on Racism and White Supremacy series, sponsored by the Center for Catholic Thought and Culture, Campus Ministry and Mission, and the Franciscan School of Theology. I am Dr. Jeffrey Burns. I am the director of the Center for Catholic Thought and Culture here at the University of San Diego. This is the beginning of a 7-part series, so we're very happy to have Dr. Constance Carroll to start our series off. So I would like now to introduce the president of the Franciscan School of Theology, Father Garrett Galvin.
Good afternoon to all of those here in San Diego. It's a great pleasure for us at the Franciscan School of Theology to collaborate with the University of San Diego to host this event on this all-important issue. The university has taken great leadership over the last few months, starting with the virtual prayer service. And I think this is kind of a great follow-up from that. And a school that's part of the Association of Theological Schools, we addressed this issue at our plenary conference this summer. And FST is deeply committed to address issues of racism and violence that this series has been founded to help us with. So it's a great pleasure for us to be part of this, and we welcome all those here.
Thank you, Garrett. We now turn it over to Michael Lovett Collier, the Director of Campus Ministry.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to join Jeffrey and Father Garrett in welcoming you all, and thank you for joining us today for this very important and timely topic. Also want to echo the thanks to the Center for Catholic Thought and Culture, Franciscan School of Theology, for their co-sponsorship of today's event. Of course, I want to express our most sincere gratitude to our speaker, Dr. Carroll. I can think of no better person to get us started on this series than you. So thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experience with us today. Before we turn the microphone over to you, which is why everyone's here today, it's my honor to introduce briefly Dr. Harris. As I think many of us know, Dr. Harris has served as the president of USD since August of 2015. One of the priorities of his tenure during that time has been the enactment of Envisioning 2024, the strategic plan for the university, which among other things has a real highlight of diversity, inclusion, and equity. Dr. Harris's commitment to those issues has also been recognized by the NAACP and the Urban League, who have given him leadership awards for his commitment to civil rights. So thank you for being with us today. Dr. Harris, thank you for your ongoing commitment to leading, to creating a community that is truly dedicated to confronting the urgent challenge of racism. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And I too want to thank the Department of Theology. I want to thank the Franciscan School and also the Harp Center and Jeffrey for pulling this really magnificent series together. And you're absolutely correct, Michael. We could not have a finer opening session than to have Dr. Constance Carroll as our speaker. Her topic today is the American Catholic Church in the Shadow of Slavery. Constance Carroll is a remarkable and just absolutely admired leader across the country. As you know, she served as the Chancellor of the San Diego Community College District since 2004. And it's really important to note that the Community College District enrolls about 100,000 plus students per semester. So she is the leader of one of the largest post-secondary educational institutions in the entire country. Prior to coming into her current role as Chancellor, she served as the president of 3 separate community colleges in California: San Diego Mesa College, Saddleback College, and Indian Valley Colleges. As you might have heard earlier, those of you who were on the call in the beginning, Dr. Carroll received all 3 degrees in and around the city of Pittsburgh, with her undergraduate degree in humanities from Duquesne University, fine Catholic institution, and her master's and her PhD in classics from the University of Pittsburgh. In 2011, Dr. Carroll was nominated by President Barack Obama and confirmed by the United States Senate to serve on the National Council on the Humanities. She also has served on the board of the American Council of Education, the American Association of Community Colleges, and the list goes on and on. It's a remarkable service to higher education and help mentor new and future leaders. And here in San Diego, she's been a remarkable leader as well. One of the accomplishments is when she helped San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulkner, and she co-chaired his Workforce and Economic Advisory Committee, the Mayor's Transition Team, the Mayor's Committee on former Central Downtown Library. She also serves on a number of other boards here in the city and the counties, including the San Diego Foundation and the San Diego Regional Economic Development Corporation. She has numerous publications and presentations. The National Association of Community College Trustees named her the Marie Y. Martin CEO Award, and she is a top honor in the California community colleges as well. She's been inducted into the San Diego Women's Hall of Fame as a recipient of the Trailblazer Award. A few years back, in 2015, she was recognized by ABC 10 News and readers as one of the 25 most influential women in the history of San Diego. So we have a remarkable colleague and friend here. For us at the university, we're so blessed. She's been on our board now, I think this is her 10th year. She has been chairperson of the Academic Affairs Committee, and she was gracious enough to step this year into the role as vice chair of our board. And there might be only one blemish on her entire record, and that is she was also the trustee who chaired the search committee for the new president in 2015. So give her a break on that one. But it's wonderful to serve with her. She is a brilliant woman, great leader, and has one of the best sense of humor that I've ever met in my life. So please welcome my friend, our trustee, and just a wonderful leader, Dr. Constance Carroll.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to see you all sort of like a giant Brady Bunch spread across the screens. And I think we all look forward to a time when we can be together in person again. Thank you, Jim, for that wonderful introduction. He paid me, by the way, for my recommendation for him to be president of the university. He's still paying in installments. It was quite a bit, but one of my greatest achievements, if I were ever asked, was being part of the search process that resulted in such a wonderful president for the university, a man of deep commitments and principles, and I've been blessed to serve on the board at USD for these past 10 years. I'm also a new board member of the Franciscan School of Theology, and I'm looking forward to my affiliation there so it can be cross-referenced. What we're doing is important, and I think it is commendable for the University of San Diego to take the lead in starting off this dialogue, because what we're about, all of us, is fulfilling a dream of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and that is to help create what he called the beloved community. And when we take a look at the foundation of our country, our nation, with its desire to form a more perfect union, what we're doing is taking that a bold step further to form a beloved community. And that can only happen with honest dialogue, a good grasp of history, and a true sense of commitment to the values that we all espouse. And in that framework, I want to talk a little bit about the Catholic Church and its role. And I've titled my talk today, "The Catholic Church in the Shadow of Slavery." And that's because, in my view, all of the issues that America is confronting today, the violence in the streets, the protests, everything devolves from what used to be called the peculiar institution of America, and that was the institution of slavery. Why was it called peculiar? It was called peculiar because of an agreement among leaders in the country that America's form of slavery was not quite as harsh as other forms of slavery in the world. So the peculiar institution is an American invention in many ways, because it was race-based, unlike other forms of slavery, which were the result of wars and other types of conditions. This was race-based, grounded in Africa. In talking about slavery, I'm reminded of the art term pentimento, if you're familiar with that. And pentimento describes a visual image that you can often see that lies beneath the surface of a work of art, a painting on a canvas, a drawing. It could have been an earlier painting and the like. And that if you know the work, as long as you appreciate that work of art and you're aware of the pentimento beneath it, you understand that both works are there within the same time frame. So although the original work was painted over, you can still see the history that led to the original work of art, the pentimento. In my view, race relations in America are exactly like that. One cannot understand or fully appreciate the racial dynamics of this country unless one understands the provenance of those dynamics. And unfortunately, history is not as robustly presented in the schools as it should be, which is why everything seems so new to our students. And many of you are professors here, and I'm sure you're aware of that. In the case of African American issues, today's issues are firmly rooted in the past and lead us to the ultimate pentimento in race relations, and that is the institution of slavery. I'd like to begin by taking a look at the challenges slavery has posed for our nation. And I'd like to take that look through the lens of a visitor to our country. That visitor was Alexis De Tocqueville. Tocqueville was a French political theorist. He was a sociologist. He was a historian, and he was a diplomat who visited the newly minted United States of America, this new democracy in the world, in the early 1800s. And his purpose was to compare this fledgling democracy with what was occurring in France at the time, particularly in the wake of what was called the July Revolution of 1830, which established or put a citizen king, in this case Louis Philippe, on the throne. Tocqueville was trying to find lessons from our democracy that he could use to study the French experiment. Tocqueville toured the United States during 1831 and 1832 and published a number of monographs about the various situations and institutions he encountered. He's best known for his extensive analysis titled Democracy in America, which was published in segments from 1835 to 1840. While Tocqueville was impressed by much of what he saw, the soaring rhetoric, the great efforts to form this more perfect union, he was also very concerned and disappointed to find huge issues pertaining to race relating to indigenous people in America and more significantly relating to African Americans who were enslaved. Here is what he said. The most formidable evil threatening the future of the United States is the presence of Blacks on their soil. From whatever angle one sets out to inquire into the present embarrassments or future dangers facing the United States, one is almost always brought up against this basic fact. No African came in freedom to the shores of the New World. Consequently, all those found there now are either slaves or freedmen. The Negro transmits to his descendants at birth the eternal marks of his ignominy. The law can abolish servitude, but only God can obliterate its traces. I see that slavery is in retreat in America, but the prejudice from which it arose is immovable. And race prejudice seems stronger in those states that have abolished slavery than in those where it still exists. As you go on to read his work, this theme is interwoven. The notion of a great institution with a corrupt core, in his view. If Tocqueville were in America today, in Kenosha, Wisconsin, in Minneapolis, in all of the states where the protests have erupted following police brutality, would he be surprised by what is happening? He would not. He would ascribe the problem to the fact that America has been taking a long time, centuries, in coming to terms with this essential law. 1619 is the date usually associated with the advent of African slavery in the United States. Through violent kidnapping and the horrific Middle Passage of transport across the Atlantic Ocean, almost 12.5 million African men, women, and children were brought to this country. However, the African slave trade reached the Americas much earlier than 1619. It actually began in the 1500s in Latin America and the Caribbean, where its growth was greatly assisted by the Catholic Church. During this period of time, orders of Catholic priests, primarily Jesuit, and nuns, owned enslaved people who were used in the sugarcane fields in Latin America and the islands, later to work in the cotton and tobacco plantations in the United States. Slaves built most of the buildings and did 90% of the work of these nations. Here, they were subjected to horrible conditions, not the peculiar version that some would have, but they were subjected to beatings, to rape, to the dissolution of their families, and of course, loss of freedom. During this period of time, the Catholic Church was the largest owner of enslaved people. This was rationalized by the white supremacist notions that Africans were subhuman and that the church was actually improving their lot by introducing them to Catholicism and by managing them, since they were believed to be incapable of managing their own lives in a non-savage manner. Two states stand out as having the largest Catholic populations at the time: Maryland and Louisiana, with enormous populations also of enslaved people who worked on the plantations. Let me talk a little bit about Maryland, since I grew up in Baltimore and have always taken an interest in the history of slavery and civil rights in this area. I should add that I'm a practicing Catholic from a Catholic family. My mother served on the Archdiocesan Finance Council in Baltimore and received a papal medal for her many services in the church. So we are have been a deeply Catholic family. In a difficult state and in a difficult city. Maryland was a slave state, of course, and when I grew up in Baltimore, it was segregated. So I saw not only were the public institutions segregated, the church was also segregated. So I have firsthand experience with that. And as you know, Maryland was founded, ironically, as a haven for people escaping religious persecution in Europe because of their Catholic affiliations and beliefs. The Catholic hierarchy of America was founded in Baltimore, with the Archdiocese of Baltimore being the oldest diocese in the United States, founded prior even to the nation's independence. The first bishop and archbishop in Baltimore and in the United States was John Carroll, himself a slave owner. At the time, the enslaved people were required to become Catholic, which is why there are so many Black Catholics in Maryland to this day. My family is an example of that. Indeed, the nation's first Catholic cathedral was built in Baltimore, the Basilica of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and the basilica still has intact its balcony that was expressly created for the purpose of seating freed slaves. So the building itself encapsulates its history. Several decades ago, a dear friend of my family in Baltimore, Archbishop William Cardinal Keeler, made a speech about slavery and the Baltimore church. This is what he said at the gathering. "We gather this evening mindful of an evil, a spiritual malady that has gnawed at the moral fiber of our nation, our community, and our church from the early days of colonial America. Catholic universities and schools also owned enslaved people, which many universities are now studying in order to determine how best to address their history and, in some cases, make reparations. You probably followed the work of Brown University, Columbia University, Harvard, and the University of Virginia, which have opened their books to show the history of their own slave holding and the work of the slaves in their universities. One incident, however, became well known. In 1838, then Georgetown College in Washington, D.C., sold off 272 enslaved people in order to retire a major debt. The plantations in the area had been failing to produce sufficient revenue for the college, and the college felt that it would not succeed unless it had an infusion of cash, and the best way to provide that was through the sale of slaves. This was a traumatic event for the slaves themselves who were in families. The president of the university, who was a Jesuit priest, thought that he had reached an agreement to ensure that the people who were sold into slavery, all of whom went to Louisiana, would be allowed to continue in their Catholic faith and would keep their families intact. That was not the case. That gentleman's agreement was not honored. Today, Georgetown University is making a concerted effort. It has a work group of faculty and community members working on this to identify the descendants of the enslaved people, the 272 enslaved people who were sold, in order to make reparations. They have been providing scholarships and other support to the descendants of these people. As we know, the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation by President Abraham Lincoln put an end to legal slavery in this country. The Emancipation Proclamation was issued on January 1, 1863, but as we know, all of the slaves were not freed until June of 1865. When Texas finally announced that the manumission of all of the slaves. And the celebration Juneteenth that African Americans celebrate today, and now others celebrate, which President Trump indicated that he discovered. I shouldn't say anything political, but that's true. It embodies the fact that this was a very difficult transition in our country. Where was the Catholic Church during this conflict, during the Civil War? Well, it was on both sides. On the one hand, Pope Gregory XVI had already condemned the slave trade as early as 1839 in a papal bull that was issued. However, during the Civil War, Archbishop John Hughes of New York definitely was on the side of the Union and actually was a confidant of President Lincoln. At the same time, Bishop Patrick Lynch of Charleston, South Carolina, was a special emissary to Pope Pius IX, sent by Jefferson Davis himself in an attempt, which was unsuccessful, to persuade the Pope to recognize the legitimacy of the Confederacy. So you had the Catholic Church in turmoil during this particular time, with everyone taking different positions. Following slavery, of course, came the ill-fated Reconstruction era, which gave way to the horrible Jim Crow ordinances and segregation, both of which were supported by the Catholic Church, and which were efforts to keep African Americans in a servile position and separated from the white population as much as possible. If you're interested in pursuing some of these things in more depth and visually, I recommend two visits. A visit to Montgomery, Alabama, which I took 2 years ago when two new museums opened. One was the Civil Rights Museum, which is brilliantly done, and the other is the museum commemorating lynching in America, which documents the over 4,000 cases of known lynching in the country. During the 1800s and 1900s, efforts to either mitigate or reverse these trends came about and were actually led by the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church, having been complicit during the period of slavery, during the later periods of particularly segregation and the civil rights movement, began to take a different turn publicly to support efforts to undo the damage of the past and create a more equal and just situation for African Americans. While working within the difficult environment and the compromises necessary to survive, some of the progressive actors, as I see them in this history, were as follows. And I will always single out someone who doesn't get much praise in this, and that is Pope Gregory XVI, who took a bold step. And I'd like to read from his papal bull in which he denounces slavery. So bear with me. I think it's very important, and I wish all of our students could see this. We have judged that it belonged to our pastoral solicitude to exert ourselves to turn away the faithful from the inhuman slave trade in Negroes and all other men, desiring to remove such a shame from all the Christian nations, having fully reflected over the whole question and having taken the advice of many of our venerable brothers and cardinals of the Holy Roman Church, and walking in the footsteps of our predecessors, we warn and adjure earnestly in the Lord faithful Christians of every condition that no one in the future dare to vex anyone, despoil him of his possessions, reduce to servitude, or lend aid and favor to those who give themselves up to these practices, or exercise that inhuman traffic by which the blacks, as if they were not men but rather animals, having been brought into servitude in no matter that way, are without any distinction in contempt of the rights of justice and humanity, bought, sold, and devoted sometimes to the hardest labor, further in the hope of gain, propositions or purchase being made to the first owners of the blacks, dissensions and almost perpetual conflicts are aroused in these regions. This is 1838. We reprove then, by virtue of our apostolic authority, all the practices above mentioned as absolutely unworthy of the Christian name. By the same authority, we prohibit and strictly forbid any ecclesiastic or layperson from presuming to defend as permissible this traffic in blacks under no matter what pretext or excuse, or from publishing or teaching in any manner whatsoever, in public or privately, opinions contrary to what we have set forth in this apostolic letter. I think Pope Gregory XVI was very bold in putting forth this ringing condemnation of slavery. Other heroes of mine are these. Mother Mary Lang, whom from Maryland, who's currently being pursued for possible sainthood in the future. She founded the Oblate Sisters of Providence in 1828 in Baltimore, which is an order of African-American nuns devoted to the education of Black girls. The order expanded its work to other states, but is still based in Baltimore County. The Mother House is still located in Baltimore County. Mother Catherine Drexel, who is a saint, in fact, she is the second American saint, who founded a number of Black Catholic schools in the early 1900s. Another group who have had a great impact, the Josephites, which the Josephites are the Society of Saint Joseph of the Sacred Heart that settled in Maryland from in the era of 1871 to 1893. The order was a missionary order that was devoted to the support of former slaves. In this group, the first African-American priest in the United States was Father Charles Uncles. However, it was not until 2011 that an African-American was elected the order's superior. So in these, you can see the journey that we're talking about, from the church being fully complicit in slavery to members of the church led by religious orders to lend support to former slaves. Another, Father John Lafarge, who was dedicated to the pursuit of equality for African Americans, founded the Catholic Interracial Council of New York and aligned his organization with the NAACP, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and other organizations. Then also Archbishop Joseph E. Cardinal Ritter of St. Louis, who put an end to segregation in Catholic schools within the Diocese of St. Louis almost a decade before the Supreme Court ruling in Brown versus the Board of Education ended school segregation in America, or at least de jure school segregation in America. And the popes, as I've mentioned, in addition to Gregory XVI, certainly Pope John the 23rd, Pope John Paul II, and currently Pope Francis have been outspoken critics of both de jure and de facto segregation and other harmful practices affecting African Americans. So this has been quite a journey, a difficult journey, which is continuing to this day, especially as America must confront the continuing vestiges of slavery, the violence against Black Americans by some of the police, which is directly devolved from how they were treated in slavery, the reemergence of white supremacy movements, which of course was at the heart of the justification for slavery, and efforts to suppress the African American vote, which is still in evidence today. However, as these developments materialize, It is heartbreaking, it is heartening, I'm sorry, to see that the Catholic Church is now openly on the side of those who reject the legacy of slavery and who are committed to ensuring equality. The Catholic Church, for me, has been a paradoxical institution with a mixed history of inspiration through promoting the values and teaching of Christ, while also subscribing to the evils of the past, contemporaneous times. The Church, while promoting a beautiful and inspiring religion of love and selflessness, is also a flawed organization because it is an organization of men who are grounded in their culture, their customs, and their heritage. As a practicing Catholic from Baltimore, Maryland, and an educator, I personally experienced both the good and the bad of the Church, which we can discuss a little bit more. Like many of you, I am very worried about the current state of our nation, which is clearly at a crossroads regarding race relations, especially the fate of African Americans. In John 13:34, Jesus said this, "I give you a new commandment, love one another. As I have loved you, so you should also love one another." In order to do that in contemporary America, while all people are of worth, it is necessary for everyone to acknowledge that additionally, Black lives matter. Let me stop here, and because part of our time together is for questions and answers and comments, and I would like to ensure that we have time for that.
Thank you, Dr. Carroll. Let's give her. As Jeffrey mentioned at the beginning, you're free to type in questions using the chat box, and then I will lift those up for you, Dr. Carroll. I wonder, though, as people are gathering their thoughts, if I could ask you a question to get us started. You mentioned earlier that, unfortunately, Tocqueville would not be surprised if he were here in 2020 and saw the things that have happened this summer in Wisconsin or Minneapolis. I wonder about you, are you surprised that there hasn't been as much progress as we would have hoped in that period of time?
Not at all. I was listening this morning to a speech by Biden, who said that about when he discussed hatred a little bit, and he said he has learned in his life that hatred is not destroyed; it simply hides. And from my standpoint, though there has been much progress, there's no longer de jure segregation. These same conditions remain. The veneer of equality and inclusion, it's a very thin veneer. There's the pentimento underneath has never been addressed. The issue of reparations, there's never been a national apology for slavery. The issue of reparations remains controversial, too difficult, too complex to address. And as a result, the festering problem remains. And so, no, I'm not surprised when I see these incidences. I myself have experienced them, and I'm sure there's not one African American I've ever met who has not been on almost a daily basis subjected to some form of discrimination, sometimes very slight, and sometimes very, very dramatic. So no, I'm not at all surprised. This is a battle and a struggle, as Dr. King said, and we must continue in the struggle in order to realize a better outcome.
Thank you to those who are typing in questions. The next one, Dr. Carroll, would be related to the church. If you could speak a little bit about what the discrimination that you or other African Americans have experienced would look like in the church, from the church.
Well, going back to Baltimore, the church for me, when I was growing up, was a Black church, St. Pius V, which was in the Black section of the city. That's where everyone was was confined. We were served by the Josephite order of priests, which was a colonial order, but which provided support. And the nuns were the Oblate Sisters of Paradise. So it was an all Black environment. The rest of the churches were either Black or white, with very few mixed congregations, and that is borne out across the country today. And though there's been more integration, somewhat more integration, the church is still de facto segregated for the most part. The church, in my experience, was a very kind of a welcoming in terms of the liturgy and its pastoral messages, but then it had a hostility when it came to the embrace of people of color. Both were present at the same time. The Archbishop of Baltimore, who was very prominent in my life and family, was was Cardinal Collier, who worked very hard to bring in more African American people and community leaders into his circle and organization, and my mother was one of them. But those were the exceptions to the rule of a very, very profoundly segregated church.
Thank you. Do you have ideas about what the church could be doing, can be doing, to more fully embrace its teaching related to the dignity of all people and the scripture passage you read about loving one another?
Well, I personally feel that it would be time for an encyclical on this, but I'm not an advisor to Pope Francis. You can pass on to him that I have some paragraphs that I would like to see in such an encyclical, and I'm very good at Latin as well, given my my schooling. By the way, I studied Latin because of the fact that when I was growing up, the church, the Mass was conducted in Latin, and many of you will recall that. And as a girl, I didn't know what the priest was saying, and I wanted to know, and so I studied Latin for that reason. But I think there needs to be greater leadership, because this is not just a United States phenomenon now. This issue of Black Lives Matter, it has become metaphorically a global issue, and it's time for the church, I think, to take a strong position in that regard. I think the church also needs to examine some of its practices, particularly the role of women in the church, so that it will be more representative of the people who believe in Catholicism.
Thank you. A question has come in related to the fact that while Pope Francis and some other leaders in the church have been outspoken, there are others in the church, in the Catholic Church, who continue to be resistant, if not downright antagonistic towards Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
What would you recommend about how one responds to those kinds of leaders, priests, people in the parishes that we might encounter who seem to be resistant?
I think they need to be confronted. One of the problems with the pentimento is that it's always kept underneath, out of sight, in hiding, and just as open expressions of anti-Semitism are confronted immediately, and many, but not all, expressions of discrimination against women are found to be intolerant. These moral comments by people who should know better need to be addressed and confronted. The issue of Black Lives Matter is one that's interesting, That is not an exclusive. That is to say that in addition to the fact that all lives matter, we must remember the unique history affecting African Americans in America. And that it's in that context that Black lives matter, because they never mattered in the history of the country in the same way that white lives mattered or other lives mattered. Certainly the people who have been greatly discriminated against through a horror of genocide are the indigenous people. And I am aghast when I see how difficult it is to remove mascots and names from sports teams and the like that denigrate people on the basis of race. There are always going to be apologists for not doing anything to combat these. And those apologists are in service of preserving the discriminatory practices, ideals, and morals of the past.
Thank you. The next question is a little bit complex, so I'll just read it as it was typed in because I think it's a good one. There's a growing recognition of historical tensions among African American and Latino communities. Hearing your description of common racist behavior experienced by many African Americans reminded me of stories around my dinner table, stories of racism and discrimination shared in Spanish. Can you share any projects locally that you find exciting where communities of color are collaborating?
Well, yes, it's a typical strategy of to pit minorities against each other. That is an old strategy. In many cases, communities of color have been binding together to resist that. If you, as an educator, for example, one of our best programs is something that's called HUBO, which is Hermanos Unidos, Brothers United. It's what it stands for. And that is a program in which every year many colleges, including ours, in fact, we were in the leadership of this, bring together young African and African American and Latino young men from high schools to help them develop an interest in college and to help them in their matriculation to college, recognizing that these are the two populations, young Black men and young Latinos, who are the most fragile and most delicate in our society. We track this at in USD as well in the university to make sure that these two groups receive additional support in their efforts, because they are the most harmed by society. So yes, there are efforts to address that. However, there's backlash as well, and we get it all the time. Why are you spending money in this way? And the answer is because it's the right thing to do, and we have to be bold in our efforts to support people who need support. Otherwise, we will not make much progress at all.
Thank you. Another question's come in. Dr. Carroll, what would you say to a pastor of a church or a Catholic school principal or a teacher who decided that they didn't want to address issues of racial justice because it would be too controversial, it might create division within their community?
What would I say? Quite a bit. Someone like that should be removed, because if we go back to the love one another, how can we love one another if we don't know one another? And inherent in the word love is to make sure that appropriate support is provided. One is we will never progress beyond the surface of the veneer if we do not study and learn the historical issues that have led us to this point. And so for a pastor or a principal or a teacher to refuse to do this means that those people are in the service of preserving a status quo which is hostile to Catholic values, and that should not be tolerated.
Thank you. Questions come in. Thank you for your reflections. You've mentioned that you see the U.S. Church now firmly on the side of those who reject the legacy of slavery. I'm wondering what you thought of the U.S. Catholic Bishop's 2018 letter on racism. If you've had a chance to read it, do you think it was effective? If you had a chance to change anything about it, what might that be?
I would strengthen it considerably, and I would make it more specific in terms of goals to be achieved. And I would certainly strengthen the notion of women in the Catholic Church as well. I think women are the just have a second-class role within many segments of the Catholic Church, and that needs to be addressed more forthrightly, especially women of color.
Thank you. Another question is, when an institution, a church, a school, a university, tries to address systemic racism within its own organization, what steps would you recommend that institution take?
I think the very first step is to find out what people know and what their notions are, and whether that's a survey or an introductory dialogue, just as we do with prerequisites for classes. The second would be to involve the institution in a systematic dialogue where faculty and others will have the opportunity to share ideas. But again, those ideas have to be formed, have to be well informed by an understanding of the past. And then the university, I think, should translate what it has learned from where people were, and then where people get as a result of dialogue to specific initiatives that the university would want to see going forward. Initiatives that would ensure that the curriculum itself, and I know there's academic freedom, but the curriculum itself should express or could contain information designed for students to learn more about the actual past and appreciate other cultures, because the curriculum of every university is still very Western-centric, and eliminates much of material that would be helpful for people to develop different views of people of non-Western backgrounds. There was a great hue and cry recently when the California legislature took the stance of requiring an ethnic studies requirement for the Cal State University system. People were shocked by that, and of course, the notion of legislative intrusion into the curriculum is very difficult and to see, but they were out of patience. And in the end, in my view, should there be such a requirement? I believe so, because people do not have, including the professoriate, a good background in the history of indigenous peoples, of African Americans, and others who are part of the fabric of American life, but who are not well understood in that regard. So yes, and a university a modern university should review that. I know USD has just developed a new core curriculum, and I think that core curriculum has helped define those types of considerations that were not the case in the past. So I see USD as being quite progressive in that regard.
Next question is about the African American Catholic community. Since that population in many places is dwindling, do you have any suggestions for how to pass along the Catholic faith in the African American community?
Well, the Catholic Church needs to re-engage with African Americans, and in many ways, and not just with African Americans, but with Americans in general. The Catholic Church has become an older. The parishes are aging, and the younger people who are coming in tend to be immigrants from South America and other countries. The church is missing missing a connection with millennials and others in America in general. And I think relating itself to these newer populations, to non-traditional populations, would be important. That I think Pope John the 23rd took an important step in that regard by and some of the efforts that have eliminated the Latin Mass, not eliminated it entirely, but have allowed for native languages to be spoken in the Mass. And I'll give a shout out to my church, St. Rita's, in Southeast San Diego, which is the most diverse parish in the diocese. And I love the church. When I moved to San Diego in 1993, I was looking for a diverse church. I didn't want to feel marginalized and feeling alone in the pews. And what I found was a church rich in diversity. We have Filipinos, Samoan, white, Latino, Mexican, African American. Everyone is represented. And the church's masses tend to celebrate diversity through their choirs and others. We have a gospel choir, we have a Samoan choir, we have all types of different celebrations. The whole church mobilizes when there's a feast day for the first Filipino saint, for example. And the parish is rich in that regard. And if you look at the age ranges, it tends to attract many types of people that other churches don't. And that is because it has emphasized diversity and welcome an environment for different types of people within the church. And so it's a drive for me to get there, but that is where I feel most at home, because I don't want to be in just an African American home or in a black-white home, which is where I grew up in Baltimore, but in a tapestry, in a mosaic where everybody is welcome and strengthened. And then as the church also reaches out to women in different ways to bring them into the Mass, that has been good, a good step. I'm now a lector and a Eucharistic minister in my church, St. Rita's, none of which was permitted when I was growing up in Baltimore. So if the church becomes modernized and expands its embrace to all people in the form of true celebration, then it can reverse this problem.
Great, thank you. I'm aware that we're about at the end of our time, but there's one question that came in and that was on my mind as well that I think might be a good way to draw this conversation to a close, which is, Dr. Carroll, in the midst of all this, where do you find hope? What sustains you?
What sustains me are young people. When I, the students with whom I work and see are very hopeful. They're very they're angry. Some of them they protest. They're concerned about the earth. They're concerned about Black Lives Matter. They're concerned about many things, and it gives me a great deal of hope to see their energy, to see their passion for making things better. For a while, I thought, oh my goodness, everyone is going to lapse into a form of materialism and complacency. And now see, especially among young people, that that is not the case. They demand a better world, and they demand a protection of the good in the world that we currently have. And so I am sustained in hope that the new generation that's moving forward does not want to allow America to rest on its laurels or sink into the mire that is currently around us. But they are going to push forward as hard as they can, and I enjoy that very much. And when I walk around our campuses, and there are, and though we are remote, many students are wearing Black Lives Matter on their shirts, and it's not just about African Americans. This is a rallying call for making America better than it currently is, and hoping that it can become a beloved community, in addition to striving to be a more perfect union.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Carroll, for your time with us today, sharing your thoughts. Many folks have been writing in their appreciation for all that you shared and for your work and your career. So thank you very much from all of us gathered here today.
Good luck to everybody. Stay well.
Thank you.